Yes, this evening. I want to welcome you here. My name is Lisa Ney, and I'm the Director of Programs and Services for Persons Living with Disabilities at JFCS of Greater Philadelphia. We are very excited to bring you this program in honor of the 30th anniversary of the ADA, the American Disability Act, and in honor of Disability Pride Philadelphia. We're thrilled to have Judith Heumann, Jim Labreck, and Nicole Noonhan with us tonight and to highlight the film Crip, A Disability Revolution and the Disability Rights Advocacy Movement. At JFCS, we're committed to supporting teens and adults with disabilities to live independent lives, to make friendships and find community, be involved in social action and advocacy, and to make our world a better place. I just want to make a plug quickly to thank Or Ben-Ari, my colleague, who helped really to bring this program together and brought us these wonderful ideas and brought the film to our attention. So thank you, Or. I want to just introduce Paula Goldstein, our CEO and President of JFCS of Greater Philadelphia.
Thank you, Lisa. I wanted to welcome everybody this evening. I wanted to let you know that JFCS, it has been very busy over the last 4.5 months in regard to the COVID pandemic. And we are very much here for the community and doing as much as we can to support all individuals who are in need of our help. And it's our commitment to stay in that place for the remainder of the pandemic. And we're so pleased to bring you this program this evening. I also just wanted to say a big thank you to Lisa and Adam Kessler for agreeing to participate in the program. Adam is a new board member to JFCS, and I will turn the program back over.
Okay. I also want to give a big thank you to Gabrielle Kaplan, Mayor. Gabby, maybe raise your hand. Gabby serves as the Chief Program Officer at Jewish Learning Venture, where she directs the whole community inclusion initiative aimed at making Philadelphia's synagogues and Jewish schools inclusive and accessible. Gabby is an author, and her most recent book, The Little Gatecrashers, is a memoir of her great uncle who overcame society's prejudices about dwarfism to lead a remarkable life. So thank you, Gabby, for partnering with us on this.
I am so thrilled to be here tonight. Lisa, thank you to you, to everyone at JFCS for making this evening possible. I am so excited for this discussion. The film was remarkable. And as Lisa said in the introduction, our work is committed to making sure that there's access for students with disabilities in the greater Philadelphia area and for their families. And this film is certainly an important way that we can all raise awareness.
Thank you, Gabby. Before we introduce our speakers, excuse me, just a couple quick housekeeping things. The program is in a webinar style. It will be discussion with opportunities for questions and answers. So please direct all of your questions in the Q&A box. Deborah is following those, and thank you, Deborah, for being our tech guru tonight and monitoring all our questions and answers. And she will be checking them and will be given an opportunity later on to answer questions. Also, if you want live captioning, please use the button at the bottom of your screen that says closed captioning, and you'll be able there to turn that on if you want captions. Now I'd like to introduce Lisa and Adam Kessler and thank them for being our moderators this evening. Adam Kessler is the past director of the Jewish Community Relations Council of Philadelphia and now serves on several boards, including ours. His wife, Lisa, was the executive VP for Paragon Outlet Malls, a commercial real estate firm that developed outlet malls. Adam and Lisa have 2 children, one of whom has an intellectual disability and lives at the adult community at Chapel Haven in New Haven, Connecticut. So just quick note before they introduce the speakers. Also, we've put a link in the chat box so that you can look at the full bios for all of our speakers. Thank you, and hope you enjoy this exhilarating discussion.
Thank you, Lisa. Hello, everybody. Well, I just want to welcome everybody again as we gather to honor the 30th anniversary of the Americans Disability Act of 1990. It's clearly a particularly poignant time to commemorate the passing of ADA as we witness great social unrest in our country. I think for many of us, the important improvements and changes that made life more livable for the disabled have become all but accepted and routine. We forget that these changes were hard fought. We may also forget that this effort is yet another chapter in the long struggle for civil rights in this country. While it is common to think of the civil rights movement as pertaining only to African Americans or women or the LGBTQ community or others, many may not realize or remember that it also included the disabled. Discrimination and oppression can take many forms. Just as the passing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 has not ended racism, perhaps the same is true with regard to the ADA. We have more yet to accomplish for the disabled community. I'm sure we will hear more about that tonight. So let me start by introducing Judy Heumann. Judy is an internationally recognized leader and lifelong advocate for the rights of disabled people. She contracted polio as a child and began to use a wheelchair for her mobility. She was denied the right to attend school because she was considered a fire hazard at the age of 5. Judy has been instrumental in the development and implementation of legislation such as Section 504, the Individuals with Education Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act, Rehabilitation Act, and the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Judy is featured in the film Crip, the film that hopefully most of you saw. In addition, her memoir, authored with Christian Joyner, called Being Human, an Unrepentant Memoir of a Disability Rights Activist, was published by Beacon Press and audio recorded by Ali Stroker, who was the first wheelchair actor to perform on Broadway. From 1993 to 2001, Judy served as the Clinton administration, as the Assistant Secretary for the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services in the Department of Education. Judy then served as the World Bank's first advisor in disability and development from 2002 to 2006. In this position, she led the World Bank's disability work to expand its knowledge and capability to work with governments and civil society on including disability in the global conversation. During his presidency, President Obama appointed Judy as the first special advisor for international disability rights at the US Department of State, where she served from 2010 to 2017. Mayor of DC appointed her as the first director for the Department on Disability Services, where she was responsible for the Developmental Disability Administration and the Rehabilitation Services Administration. Lisa.
Jim Labreck is the writer, producer, and director of the film. He has over 40 years of experience as a film and theater sound designer and mixer, author, disability rights activist, and filmmaker. Jim started his career in the theater and became sound designer, mixer, and sound supervisor. In 1996, he founded Berkeley Sound Artists, an audio post-production house whose credits include many notable films, including The Blood of Yingzhou District, which won the Academy Award for Short Documentary in 2006. Jim also co-authored the book Sound and Music for the Theater, The Art and Technique of Design, now in its 4th edition, and is used as a textbook all over the world. Jim is currently a board member at the Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund, which works for the rights of the disabled through education, legislation, and litigation. Jim is married to Crip camp producer Sarah Boulder.
And Nicole. Nicole is an Emmy-winning documentary producer and director, 4-time Sundance Film Festival alumnus, and 5-time Emmy nominee. She has recently produced 2 virtual reality films with the Australian artist-director Lynette Walworth, the breakthrough VR work Collisions, which won the 2017 Emmy for Outstanding New Approaches to Documentary, and Awavina, did I say that right? Featured at the World Economic Forum in Davos and at the 2017 Sundance Film Festival. Nicole co-directed The Revolutionary Optimists, winner of the Sundance Hilton Sustainability Award. She also co-directed and co-produced the acclaimed documentary, The Rape of Europa, about the Nazi war on European culture, for which she was nominated for a WGA award and shortlisted for an Academy Award. With Pulitzer Prize winning photographer Brian Lanker, she produced They Drew Fire about the combat artists of World War II and co-wrote the companion book distributed by HarperCollins. A 1997 graduate of the Stanford Documentary Film Program, Nicole lives in Oakland with her husband Tom, Oakland, California that is, with her husband Tom and two sons, Finn and Blaine. Well, that's quite an impressive CVs for all of you. I guess we're going to talk now about the film. We found it very, very powerful, very interesting. Of course, our daughter went to a special needs camp, so it resonated with us on a certain level, of course. Let's talk about where the idea came from for starting to film this. I mean, we thought it was quite interesting. We thought only people with iPhones film things these days, but clearly somebody had enough forethought to think about filming that. And again, what's with the name? I know that created a little bit of controversy. And I'll throw that to anyone that wants to answer, because you guys know each other well.
Hey, Adam, there was a bit of a mix-up in all of our bios, but Nicole and I co-directed and co-produced Crip Camp together.
Okay.
So I just want to make that really clear. We wouldn't be anyway, and our collaboration has been probably one of the most incredible things I've ever experienced in my life. So allow me to just say that up front. Let me talk about the title a little bit, and maybe Nicole and Judy can get into other parts of this question.
So you need to get into why the film happened.
Yeah, start just how did the film happen, and then maybe talk about what prompted it, and then let's talk about that title, because that is interesting.
Our origin story here is that I've had the pleasure of mixing and being the sound designer on 3 of Nicole's previous feature-length documentaries, and we've been friends for years. And so about 5 years ago, we were having lunch together, kind of as she was wrapping up The Revolutionary Optimist, and as the sound mixer well over close to 200 documentaries. I've seen the power of documentary film, but I never felt like I really saw a film that was really showing the experience of my life as somebody with a disability or others. And loving Nicole and her work, I was kind of pitching her different ideas of maybe films she would like to do about disability. And kind of almost sheepishly and offhandedly, near the end of the conversation, I kind of went, Nicole, what I've actually really always wanted to see was a documentary about the summer camp I went to.
So yeah, that piqued my interest. Although I was a little afraid to ask for more, because some people are very, very attached to their summer camp stories because they mean a lot to them, but that doesn't necessarily mean they need to be, 2-hour-long feature documentary films. And then Jim starts telling me about Camp Jened, and it was one of those experiences you have where somebody, or I have had a handful of times, maybe 2-3 times before, where you start to hear a story and you start to see the movie in front of your eyes, and you start to get excited because you feel, oh, this story could really be transformational. It could really change the way people see, because Jim was painting a picture of something I had never seen before on film, or in my own life, but I really didn't have the context for understanding and appreciating what life was like for teenagers in the pre-ADA era, or certainly like in 1971, which is around when I was born. And I also didn't really understand, except through Jim at that time, much about disability culture and community and how that came to be. And also I thought, wow, you don't see films on TV about people with disabilities that are like raucous and wild and hippie and fun and involve, a little dope and, talk about, people hooking up and things like that. I mean, it was, it seemed to me like it would bust stereotypes in a really powerful way. And so I got really excited about the idea. And then Jim said something that clinched the deal for me, which was, I think I have this theory that there's something about this profound experience of liberation at this summer camp that's connected to the movement that came later. And so, so we decided to work on it together. I thought it would be really exciting to co-direct it with Jim, because we'd been, thinking it would be fun to work together. And I thought how also groundbreaking and wonderful if an important film about disability history was to be made by somebody who lived that history himself, and from his point of view. And so we got down to business, and the first two things we wanted to try to do were see, could we find this footage that Jim remembered existed? And we better call up Judy Puman and see what she thinks about this whole idea. And that's how we got going.
I mean, you found this footage that, was 50 years old. I mean, who had this footage? It's fascinating.
And there was
so
lot
much of it.
Yeah.
I had remembered that this group of hippie videographers came to the camp this one summer, and that they had been there for a while. And in fact, they had strapped this heavy tape deck to the handlebars of my wheelchair and gave me the camera, and somebody pushed me around camp. And all I can remember was that the name People was in their name. But that was enough that, Nicole, and you spent months trying to track this down, right?
Yeah, I did. And it was a bit of a needle in a haystack. And finally, somebody digitized this old magazine about early video activists and put it online. And then buried in the back, there was a little ad, and it said, "Crabs outbreak at Camp Jeanette for the Handicapped by the People's Video Theater." And then I knew the name of the group, and then we could track them down. And it turns out they were just a few miles away in San Francisco. Jim and I live in Oakland. And they had 5.5 hours of footage. It had survived all these years, 17 different moves and basements, in fact. And we go over to San Francisco to meet Howard Gutstadt, who's the guy you actually see, interviewing people in the footage. And when he saw Jim come into the restaurant, he burst into tears, because these guys had dedicated so many years of their lives trying to empower communities with the use of media. And can you imagine, 50 years after filming a project, to see one of the people in your project come to you and say, now I'm going to pick up that footage and tell the story myself. It was really an amazing moment. And they were really gracious and wonderful to work with us and let us use all that footage.
Fantastic. Yeah.
There were scenes of in the movie of group conversations talking about your parents and how this experience away from them made you feel. Was that for the film, for this group that came in and filmed, or was that part of the philosophy of the camp? And I'd like you to talk a little bit about the philosophy of the camp, not treating anyone differently, no matter how verbal they were, how they could communicate, just that everybody was in the same boat.
And we'll get back to the title.
Oh, right.
Forget that. Yeah.
Let me just answer the first part of that question, and then I want to shut up for a while. When these folks came into camp, they, and you can see this in the film where Judy is saying, "There's some people here filming us," and they said, "Look, let's make a film about your camp with us." They wanted to work with us, and we had decided that it would be really great to have a video or film, as we were calling it at the time, of a message to our parents. And so that is really what you're seeing. But yet, Judy's talked about really how, especially in her bunk, they were talking about things much more important than we were talking about in the boys' bunk.
That's not unusual.
I think the philosophy of the camp really evolved over the years, because I started going to the camp when I was like 12 years old, so 1959, 1960. And this footage is shot in 1971. So there was a lot of change that was going on in society overall, becoming more liberal, and I think the footage that we see, one of the people at the camp was in management, Shelley Coy. His mom and dad both had polio, and they had gone to Jeanette, and they also raised him and his brother to be involved in what was going on in their lives. And so the mother was active in, I think, Jewish Federation programming in New York, and they had a Saturday program. And Shelley talks about how, he was helping people go to the bathroom, eat, do everything. He was like very involved in what was happening, not in a hands-off way, but, just as the kid with the family had disabilities, kind of getting involved. And I think that really partly was why the camp, as it advanced, began. I didn't know this until I talked to Shelley last night, another interview we were doing. They started this program for, I guess, experimental program for disabled people to begin to work at the camp. Did you know about this, Jimmy? Some kind of yeah. Anyway, so I would say that when I was first a camper there really weren't disabled people working there. But as the years went by, then disabled people started working there. And I think it really was in part because things were changing in the community. Larry Allison, who was the director, and other people were really moving towards a more inclusive environment. And I think very much had a philosophy that camp would be an opportunity for the disabled kids to do what other kids in our age group would do. But on the other hand, really, there was a group of disabled people, some of whom had pretty significant disabilities, and some of whom had multiple disabilities. And there was never, kids weren't separated by bunks based on disability. They were separated by sex and age, which is what happens at camps.
That's right.
And I think that was also very important. And I think the piece that we see that was shot, it was teenagers. So there were people, between the ages, well, Jimmy was 15. I was 21 or 22. There were a few people there younger than you, Jimmy, right? And older. So, it was a group of people who also were not just going to camp for the camp experience, because the camp experience was more than what typically I think went on at camps. And now I'm not talking about sex or dating or anything like that. I'm talking just about the fact that it was a real opportunity for people over a long period of time, because many of the campers came back for many years. And many of us, when we weren't at camp, were friends during the year. And so we really started conversations for 71, where we were looking at what the deficiencies were in our communities. And I think at that point, also really beginning to discuss and realize that we weren't the problem, that when you looked at the broader community and the civil rights movement and women's movement, etc., it was people who were able to say that they weren't the problem, society was the problem. And when we were looking at it from that perspective, we were also looking at what were the implications of our not being able to participate in society like our non-disabled peers. So, and there wasn't any reason to restrict anything that anybody was doing, because these were just natural discussions that were happening, or nothing was really organized.
Yeah.
The most organized thing was that discussion around the table, which was an atypical discussion, right? Because there was a video. And so, in fact, it was great discussion. And I think the video really empowered people to say what they were saying. But things like that were being discussed all the time in a less formal setting.
I'm just curious, given the time period. I mean, the facilities seem somewhat rudimentary. I mean, by today's standards, of course. And I'm just curious, were you able to take any camper in? Where there were some that the camp was not able to accommodate?
We weren't in the selection process, but
You
I
were,
would say by and large, no. I mean, I never heard any discussions about someone not being accepted into the camp.
Mhm.
Which doesn't mean that didn't happen, but we could ask Shelley. But did you ever hear that, Jimmy?
Yeah. Right. And so just to get back to the name, because I know that's a little bit of a.
You want to get an answer to that question?
Yeah, well,
It's very deep.
Jimmy, I saw something you said about it online. I thought it was very interesting. So.
You know, well, Nicole and I, there's a whole bunch of things wrapped up in here. So I first heard the term Crip camp from Corbett O'Toole, who's in the film, and we're friends in the Bay Area. And she said, "Did you go to Crip camp?" And for a moment there, it was a new term to me. And oh, I know what she means. She means a summer camp for people with disabilities. So okay, so it's a little bit of shorthand, but also the use of the word Crip, which has been going on for a long time in our community, was an act of rebellion. It was an act of reclaiming the word cripple. But it was also an indicator among ours. This is I think this is the way I feel what it means is that if somebody I'm talking like this or somebody else is talking like this, it says that I am politically aware, I am culturally connected to my disability, and that I'm a bit radical about it and unapologetic about it also. So, you know, it was Camp Jeanette, it wasn't called Crip Camp. But so with all of that said, you know, Nicole and I, we wanted a title for the film that made it really, really clear that this wasn't your average film about a bunch of handicapped people in wheelchairs at a nice summer camp. You want to talk about that, Nicole? Kind of about what we were trying to do there?
Yeah, sure. I mean, you know, literally like Jim, we would go pitch the film at, you know, at Sundance or something. We'd be going, trying to meet people and find funding. And Jim would say, well, what are you working on? Well, I'm working on this film about this summer camp I went to. And people would go, oh, like that, you know? And Jim would be like, no, you know? So we wanted a title that was a little in your face, a little punk rock, because as you see, that's, you know, a bit of the attitude that folks in the film have. And that really indicated that it was like, you know, a film told from an inside out perspective. And also that just raised the question, like most, you know, many people, I should say, do not know there is a disability community and culture. So even just to think like, oh, is that a word that people have reappropriated and that's okay, then makes that clear, right? There is a community and there is a culture. So all of that was really important. And when we first started talking with folks at Netflix about the title, they were like, well, we're a little concerned because we've run some social media tests and there's, you know, 90 or 80% of the time the word is used, it's used to talk about the gang. So we don't think people are going to understand what it's in reference to. And Jim said, you know, that's the problem, basically, you know, and so, you know, if we can overcome that, if we can like get it to where people do know that, that's actually like a pretty important piece of cultural education. And so we were aware that we were going to be, you know, not everyone in the community accepts the word and that we were going to be confusing some people. And indeed, I do occasionally see people on Twitter going like, wow, that film is not at all what I thought it was going to be. But generally speaking, you know, I think it has really served the purpose that we intended it to. And we felt pretty passionately about sticking to our guns on it.
Yeah,
I really think though we should say, what is the name of the film? What is the name of the film?
Well, Netflix wanted to have a subtitle.
Oh,
So
The
it's
name
Crip
of the
Camp, a
film now
disability,
is Crip Camp what?
a disability revolution.
Okay,
Yeah.
I think that a disability revolution really explains the term without explaining it. So it's not standing by itself.
True.
Crip Camp, a disability revolution, in my mind, takes away any of the discussion around the word Crip.
Right.
I've been amazed at how very few people have said anything in thousands of people that I've been speaking to over the last number of months. I would say, you know, Adam, because in the DD community, there's like purist language
Right.
people are supposed to use. And, you know, you don't use, and I mean you personally, but many in the community, in the DD community, in the professional DD community, don't use the term disabled people, but people with disabilities. And for decades, there was this requirement that people not use the word disabled people, but use the term people with disabilities. And that was pretty much drummed into people's head, and people were called out at meetings if they used the term disabled people. So I would say, you know, really language is still something that we're working on. We've kind of narrowed down what we consider to be appropriate. And remember, the word cripple is not a new word.
Right.
The word cripple is the word that was used before handicap
Right.
and then disabled. So I
Well-
think, as Jimmy was saying, it was people taking the word and using it ourselves. But on the other hand, there is no intention in having the film called Crip Camp that would say non-disabled people can start calling us Crips,
Right.
not being a part of the gangs.
Yeah, thanks for making that point. Yeah.
Well, so
Let's
I have
move
a
on,
question
though,
for Judy. That is a scene in the film. It was after camp, and it was after 504 passed. And there's a poignant scene where you said, if I have to be thankful for an accessible bathroom, when am I going to be equal in the community? Which really
Hit us.
hit me.
Mhm.
Hit us. There has been legislative progress. Where do you think things are today in terms of the progress made, and also with societal attitudes and perceptions?
It's probably a question we should all answer,
Yeah.
not just the three of us, but everybody here. So I would say it goes without saying that from the time I was born and Jimmy was born, things have dramatically changed. And is it your daughter that has a disability or your son?
Yes, our daughter.
Yeah, so I'm sure you would say the same for your daughter, that things have changed. They've changed because of 504 and IDEA, I would say, are some of the most significant changes that have resulted in younger disabled people's lives changing, because it granted people the right to go to school and things of that nature. ADA, I think, gave a whole new set of protections that didn't come about previously. And society is changing. But I would say, for me, I think we still see, if we want to have a discussion around media, which is really a lot about what we're talking about tonight, representation of disabled people in media, in my view, is still terrible. And you have people like Jimmy that are setting up a group that's working with disabled documentarians, and he can talk all about that. And work that I'm doing with some other people also on helping to get the voices of disabled people advanced in journalism and documentaries and film and television, and many other groups that are doing work from a disability perspective to get into the media and all parts of media, and to be able to address representation more appropriately. But I think for me, media is such an important influence in our lives that if we were able to truly jumpstart representation in the media, with disabled people being employed across the board, and having the influence that media is having for women and for Black people and for Asian people and Latinos and LGBTQ, et cetera, we would make more rapid advancements. So we've done reasonably well, but I think it goes without saying that we are nowhere near where these other groups are, in part because our ability to come together and organize is also different than the ability of other groups to come together and organize.
Mhm.
I think one of the big issues is money. You know, the lack of disabled individuals who have money to really support organizations. When you look at groups like GLAAD and others, people have money and they put money into their organizations for rights-based work. We're still moving in that direction. But I think we've made progress. We have a lot more to go. Jimmy, you should.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen some improvements, but it is just, I feel like our community in regards to accurate representation in general, we're probably 25, 30 years behind any other kind of group. And I think Judy points out some of the issues involved. And I think one of the most important things that Judy and I and many other people have been advocating for is that we need this pipeline within the entertainment industry to allow people to become box office draws. And we need people in the writers' rooms and producers, but yet when internships are not accessible or not seeking out or are rejecting people with disabilities, when networking opportunities and parties are inaccessible to people, it's going to take a century for us to get further.
Not a century. Not a century. We're not going to live to be the end of this century. And think
I was being melodramatic just to show people
Making a point.
what a great writer I am.
Right.
I mean, I think, Jimmy is a really important person to talk about because, we don't have time right now, but if you look at his path, as he was moving forward in his field and becoming recognized, he had to really put himself out. I'm speaking my thoughts and he can correct me, but it's not easy when you are one, right? And I know that from work that I've done, and you're trying to be recognized for the work that you're doing. It's kind of a shaky as you're moving up, having nothing to do with disability. There's so many people that are moving forward who are reasonably decent, and you're kind of having to make your way through and be seen for who you are. When you can't be seen for who you are because places aren't accessible, and then you have to begin to speak up and out about why isn't disability being spoken about? Why are these buildings not accessible so I can't have the same opportunities? You can be poo-pooed and pushed to the side, and that can be the end. Or you can, in fact, as Jimmy, I think, has done really well, kind of massage people to get them to understand that he is an example of a quality person, and that the failure for him to be able to pursue his career, like for other people, adversely affects good documentary making, for example, or sound mixing, or whatever the hell it may all be. But I think, the other thing with other groups is that, as Jimmy was saying, when you're looking at 20 to 25 years behind, that also means that there are people from these different communities who legitimately are continuing to talk about how things are not yet where they need to be, but there are still people the Shonda Rhimes who are setting up their own companies. The Me Too movement bringing women in, African American and Latino and Asian and LGBTQ people who are working in all these organizations and can make sure that they're bringing people into their groups. We have disabled people that are working in many of these organizations, but frequently they have hidden disabilities. They're not acknowledging their disabilities. They're not reaching out to bring other people up. And I think that in part is changing a little bit as we're seeing more people begin to disclose that they have various disabilities. So you can see doors opening a little bit. And I think it's important for this audience to really look, in my view, at Crip Camp as one which hopefully, outside of seeing the film, also allows people to really think about the film and how the film should be making a difference in the way we as individuals or society advance in this area.
Right. I think the door is wide open, as I said in my opening little comment. I think that there's particularly right moment for that in the way people are thinking for a lot of reasons, which
I don't think the door is open. I think the door is a little ajar.
a little ajar. Okay.
Can I add one thing to that?
Go ahead.
I just, I was talking earlier with our executive producer, Howard Gertler, about this issue because we had a discussion last night with some folks in Hollywood who are also working on it, pitching stories around disability and coming up against obstacles, and it's really hard. And he said, kind of put some things together for me in a way that I hadn't quite yet in my mind, which is, he said we had an advantage with the documentary because we weren't having to ask anyone to imagine anything, we could show it. We could cut that footage together and take a trailer out to people and go, look at this. And people would see it and they would go, oh my God, that's so amazing. And I want to see more of it. Whereas when you go to an executive who has limited imagination and ask them to imagine something like Camp Jened, they cannot make that leap.
That's
so
right.
I think that's kind of fascinating and kind of an interesting role for documentary to be playing in trying to kickstart Hollywood.
Now, even if they're well-intentioned, they just can't make the leap. They just don't understand it, right? We have a lot of questions. I'm sure Deborah's managing that, and we want to bring the audience in. We want to ask one question that we have left about people with intellectual disabilities, which again is a topic that's close to us. Are they as involved in the disabilities rights movement? Is it different? Perhaps you could talk about that. I mean, we didn't sense that in the film.
Well, I mean, I think it's important to recognize at that point, in 1971, what was really happening were the Stan Hares, the Phil Cups, the Bill Bronsons, lawyers and advocates that were breaking down institutions. Because that's really where not all, but many people with developmental disabilities were living. Kennedy's daughter, on and on. So, and I would say that the, I like to talk about people with Down syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at people with Down syndrome in the 1960s, and you look at people with Down syndromes in the 1990s on forward, you would think that there was something very different. The only thing that was different was that there were people who began to realize that institutions were not good, that if people were raised like other children in the community, that they would be seen differently. When people stopped cutting the hair of people with Down syndrome all the same way and dressing them all the same way, and people started with Down syndrome dressing like their brothers and sisters and others in the community and began to go to schools, there was nothing that changed for people who had Down syndrome. It was the way families and other people were finally saying, institutions are bad, this is what we want. And I'm just using that one particular group because in many ways, you know, they have similar characteristics. But I think the other issue to look at is what is called now the Self-Advocacy Movement, which I think many people with intellectual disabilities are beginning to question that label also, which I agree with. I don't like that label.
Mm-hmm.
You started to see organizations run by people with intellectual disabilities being created. Organizations like TASH that began to bring people in with intellectual disabilities who began to play roles, and University of Syracuse and universities now that have programs for people with intellectual disabilities where people are going and getting certificates and taking courses. Things have changed. So I think there definitely is a much stronger voice of people who have intellectual and developmental disabilities. We have organizations like the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network and other groups, all of whose name like SABE and some other groups. And I think that's really important. We have on the Biden committee, the Task Force on Disability, Liz Weintraub, who has an intellectual disability, is very out about her intellectual disability. She's one of the 6 co-chairs. So I would say people with intellectual disabilities have really advanced also in the movement, and that people with certain mental health disabilities are still not yet in the mix as much as they need to be. But we're looking at those who've been the most stigmatized, and people with intellectual and developmental disabilities and people with certain types of mental health disabilities certainly have been in those categories. But they are really moving up and moving out. And if you look at things like the International Disability Alliance, which is a big international organization, they too have people with intellectual and developmental disabilities on their boards, on the UN Committee for the Rights of Disabled People. There's an individual with an intellectual disability on the committee. So things are definitely moving in the right direction. They're not where they need to be, but dramatically different than when this film was made.
Wonderful. That's good news. That's good news. It's always good to have audience participation in these things, even though we're all sitting in our homes. We can feel like we're part of the discussion. Deborah, did you want to ask a couple of questions?
Yeah, we actually have at least 3 very good questions. One that actually fits right into what we were just discussing is, what's the next step in terms of advocacy today to lay the framework for the next 20 years?
Jimmy, you want to go?
Would you mind repeating the question? Because I don't.
For sure. It's okay. What is the next step in terms of advocacy today to lay the framework for the next 20 years?
I think that we have to really look to the current generation that is really doing the work, and that is very much based in disability justice. And disability justice, I mean, the shorthand for this is really looking at disability rights from a non-white, not males, and non-white, not male, not straight lens. And so when we look at marginalization in any in society, any community has that going on, and we certainly do ourselves. And so those people that I know in the Crip Camp's impact campaign, we handed it over to 2 incredible leaders, and who are very much involved with disability justice, and that is a way to really pass the microphone and really do what we can to really support the people who are doing some very hard work right now. Not to discount what's come before, but with any movement, you've got to support and love and help the up and coming and current generation.
So for me, in the area of disability, I know we have a lot of emphasis on younger people, which I think is very important, but I also feel really strong that we need to be much more intergenerational, because the majority of people with disabilities are acquiring their disabilities above the age of 40. So we really need to be focusing on the entire community. And I think there's a model in that of really being able to be intergenerational. I think when we look at the issue of the ADA and the 30th anniversary, I guarantee you, if you talk to 50 people on the street and ask them what the ADA was, if 5 of them knew what it was, that would be like amazing. There would be 20% of that population would likely have some form of a disability, frequently an invisible disability that they may not even know would be covered under the ADA. But I think we desperately need to, when we talk about 61 million disabled people in the United States, and you look at the breakdown of the population, we need to be looking at it racially, gender, religious, etc. And we need to look at it from an age perspective. My other feeling is that if non-disabled individuals at the moment really got that disability was something that is likely to happen in one's lifetime, either temporarily or permanently, that they would get more invested in their futures. And right now, I think many people are not invested in their futures because they don't want to be like us. They don't want to think about them being like us. And like us doesn't mean Jimmy and me in wheelchairs. Like us, it could be meaning somebody who's having memory problems, vision problems, auditory problems, heart problems, cancer, bipolar, depression, anxiety. heart disease, cancer, whatever it may be, people don't want to look at those things. And I really would love to be able to have another discussion with Trevor Noah, honestly, because that was completely, as you can assume, an unplanned, unscripted discussion. When he used the term able-bodied,
Yeah, I remember
and
that.
I came back and I said, I don't use the word able-bodied, I use the word non-disabled. And he said to me, are you threatening me? I mean, I really love the guy. I think he's brilliant. And I think that word, are you threatening me? And I was surprised by it. And I said, well, I guess I am. But I think there's much more there. I mean, what I really loved about him saying it is he used the word threat. And it was completely spontaneous. But something in him looked at disability as a threat. Are you threatening me? And so what I think is important about that is not a jibe against him at all. It's really taking that phrase and unpacking it. Because I believe that one of the reasons we do not see disability represented in media and other places the way it should, people don't want to confront their own vulnerability. And for me, that's the bottom line.
Yeah.
They can't believe that we're like them. And what the ADA and Crip Camp and many other things, hopefully over time, it will allow people to see is that we are all part of a community. We come from all these different components of life. And actually, you know, this is a Jewish group. So I think as a Jewish group, we really need to understand and speak up more about the marginalization of who we are and what we've had to do in order to be able to become more a part of the broader community, and use examples of things that we're doing as we're really moving towards advancing the inclusion of intergenerational, racially diverse, religiously diverse, sexually oriented diversity, and bring that forward. So it's really got to be a melting pot where all people are invited to come to the table, and where we all have responsibility for learning about each other's differences and really creating a new dynamic. So in 30 years, that's what I want to see, a new dynamism. I want to see people respecting each other, learning from each other, acknowledging that none of us are perfect, and we all have things to learn.
Thank you. Beautiful.
That was amazing. You actually answered 3 questions in that one response. That was so fabulous. Well, we have a very interesting question from one of our clients, actually, who wants to know what, in your opinion,
clients. You shouldn't call people clients. You shouldn't distinguish them.
Thank you. I appreciate the correction. Okay. She's one of my favorite people in the.
Are you threatening her?
What?
She just happens to be one of my favorite people. No. But I love Ina very much. She's one of my favorite people. But she has a very good question, which is, what, in your opinion, makes for a great advocate?
So Ina, I don't know if you can speak right now. I don't know if we can hear you. Can you allow her to speak?
I can allow her to speak. Let me find her on the list.
So Ina, I'm known for, by the way, my first cousin who I love, her name's Ina. Let me just also say that I am known for asking people questions. So the question that you're asking me, I will answer, but could you please tell me what you think makes a good advocate?
It's a person that has a good voice, who can speak up for others. And what the quote is, about us without, anything
nothing
said with us.
Nothing about us.
Nothing about us without us. That's it. So I know that I, and maybe some of my other friends, have a voice and giving it back to others who can't speak up for themselves.
Yeah, and I would also say that good advocates also can advocate for themselves, because we're actually role models to others. So it's working with others to advance our lives as well as the people that we're working with. You agree?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ina.
Thank you. Thank you, Deborah.
So any other questions from the any other questions from the audience? You had one more.
Yeah, we do have another question. This one is referring specifically to Judith's comment about greater inclusion of disability people in all workplaces and human life. What would that look like?
If we were more integrated.
If about what would greater inclusion of disabilities, I mean, this the way it's worded is what about greater inclusion?
Well, who asked that question? I want to hear from you.
David.
So David, tell
David?
me, what's your answer, David?
David, you're unmuted, so you can speak.
Oh, hello.
Hello,
Can you hear me?
Mhm.
I can hear you, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, you know, I liked your movie, and I was thinking, how would there be a sequel? I don't know if you guys ever thought about it in those terms, even for fun, if not seriously. But you know, you were making me think, you know, maybe disability people would be on the news and talking, and you know, just because they're in a wheelchair, it doesn't have to stop them from being good speakers or delivering the news. And so I was thinking, you know, maybe you could even create a movie that shows all disability people doing everything, and not even necessarily any regular people per se. Like everybody would have an obvious disability, or maybe you could like just show the society that's where everybody has no disability because they're all accommodated and they all can just go out and interact. I don't know if Star Trek or special effects, or you know, joking around with Muppets, pigs in space, or disability people in space, you know, would be a way to think of it. But you know, you'd have to do whatever you think is appropriate. But maybe you could show us like in a literal way, or show all the people who you said couldn't imagine, like the Hollywood people or the producers, even with good intentions, you said couldn't imagine. Maybe you could just show them, like, you know, a world of all disabilities accommodated to the point where everybody can go anywhere and do anything. You know, you might have to go into a science fiction kind of a thing to exaggerate it. I don't know. I mean, if you want to spend money or computer graphics, but I was just wondering, you know, do you just mean in all the workplaces, every job, every museum, or in the news, they should all be talking, and they should all be, you know, regular disability people, not just all non-disability people, and it would just be a regular way of life, so we wouldn't think about it. So with all that, I'm just kind of wondering if, you know, maybe a sequel for you guys. I don't know.
Thank you, David.
Love it.
Sorry if I talk too much.
Nicole, Nicole, what were you gonna say?
Oh, I love that. I love that idea. I did see, excuse me, a trailer for a film that was made in Australia where disability was the norm and people with non-disabled people were sort of the stigmatized ones, and it was hilarious. It was a comedy and it looked really, really good. But I really love your idea. I think Jim and I are going to have to put our heads together about that one.
I think it's a great idea. Here, Jimmy, what's your?
But I want to just speak to this very briefly. It's a wonderful question, David. Thank you so much. And my work, I'm trying to work with promoting documentary filmmakers with disabilities. We're trying to encourage organizations that are having panels not to only have us on accessibility or diversity panels, but have somebody with a disability talking about sound, like I know so well, or visual effects, like this woman Caitlin that we all know, who's brilliant at it. That is when you really start arriving and being accepted and integrated in society, when you're not there because of your disability, but that you're part of society.
I think I'm not a comic book aficionado, but Jimmy, I think, knows more about comic books than I do. But I think, you know, you can see, we got to know more than I do since I don't know very much. But, you know, we are seeing more characters in comic books who have disabilities. I just got a comic book from Great Britain, which includes a number of disabled people in the comic book. And I know in some of the other series that are going on, there are more disabled people. So I think, David, you've got a great idea. You know, it's fantasy, but not. I mean, why, you know, nobody thinks anything about making a movie where everyone has no disabilities, right? That's the norm. But if we did a film where everybody had a disability, it could be great and it could be funny, and it could be, you know, the piece that Nicole talks about in Australia. I've seen it. It's really funny. So I think getting non-disabled people to laugh at things, not in a sicko weird way, but to laugh about how we see things about non-disabled people, you know, I think that could be really funny. And where we were the dominant force and we were making, you know, non-disabled people have to apply for jobs and appear multiple times for interviews and scrutinize them the way that we scrutinize us, I think that could be hysterical. I mean, the other thing is, you know, you could just, David, I don't know, but maybe even talk into a tape recorder or computer with the recording on about some of your ideas. And maybe there's some friends of yours that could even help you put something together. You're not necessarily looking in the beginning at a Hollywood version, but really something that, quite frankly, maybe one of the synagogues or Jewish groups that have, you know, theater groups could take and help put this together. You could potentially do something that would be both giving disabled people acting jobs and also bringing the non-disability community in to see the world the way we see it.
I absolutely love that.
Yeah.
And I just want to say that David is an amazing artist as well. And maybe we can include that. That'll be our next project, David.
That's what
Love
you could do for February. You could have a
Do you
play.
want to take, I'm sorry, did you want to take one last question?
One last one.
As we are officially out of time, but this is just too good.
Rich Davis, do you want to ask your question?
Sure. By the way, thank you so much, all of you, for putting this on, for being here. So individuals with disabilities need good jobs in order to become economically self-sufficient and prosperous. Are there plans to use Crip Camp in any way to change the attitudes at chambers of commerce, boardrooms, in the C-suite? It's got such a fantastic message. I mean, the employers really have got to get this so that the cultures change there.
I mean, sorry, Jimmy, go ahead.
Thank you for the question, Rich. I would say that this is happening. I'm partaking in kind of a talk with approximately 500 to 1,000 people who work for Kaiser Permanente, the healthcare service provider, tomorrow, and that there are employee interest groups that are seeing how the film can be used within their organization to really bring the message into their companies. So indeed, your idea is something that other people are definitely have picked up on, and we need just a lot more of.
I mean, I think, Rich, you know, this film obviously is something that's very important. People can look at it and talk about it. When we're talking about changing cultures in the area of employment, a film, the best film in the world, is not going to produce that change. It can help advance it, but it's not going to produce the result that you're talking about. Because at the end of the day, we're looking at human resources offices, we're looking at the leadership within the organizations, we're looking at how they're doing their recruitment, how people are doing interviews for people who are going to be prospective employees, to make sure that they are not being biased in their questioning, that people understand issues around accommodations, on and on and on. This film, in my view, really allows people to see a movement, a disability rights movement, and the birth of that movement, and definitely is part of it. But I don't think any one thing ever makes the changes that you're talking about, because I don't know how many years have you been involved in this work, Rich?
Since the 90s.
Since when?
Since the 90s. Actually, in 74, I graduated from college, and as a psychology undergrad, I worked in the psychology department at Mansfield State School. And at that point, we just said the R word because it's what we had, but it's what it was. And so things have changed, I certainly will say. And they just have to get better. I just think it's the employment. It's the fabulous people who are coming out of colleges and universities, and they need jobs, and the employers need the value. And I really think Crip Camp is such a fabulous I mean, it's historical, it's
Absolutely.
moving and all, and I know it's going to play a role. So I just want to thank you.
Thank you.
So folks, you have all been quite patient and we appreciate your valuable time. I know this is probably your 12th Zoom call of the day, all three of you, especially given the time of year this is the 30th anniversary. Everybody online, I see we have about 50 plus people still with us. Judy, Nicole, Jimmy, thank you so much. Thank you for even as parents with a special needs adult. I mean, I learned.
And I also suggest, Adam,
Yes.
none of my business, but don't call your daughter a special needs person.
Okay. Well,
Call her your daughter.
she likes
Well,
that. She likes
I
it.
know, but you know what? All of these words make people look at us differently.
Okay.
And that's really, for me, whenever you use the word special, special means something different when you're talking with non-disabled people. But yeah,
We do understand that. It just in this context. Lisa, I will just let you perhaps finish up with maybe some housekeeping details.
Great. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate this. This was a dynamic conversation and there's so much work to be done, and just so happy to have all of you doing such amazing work. And, you know, can't emphasize enough all of the wonderful things that you all said. And Judith, thank you for correcting us on things, because it is a continual learning process. And we hope to continue the learning and hope to be able to bring additional programs in the future. So Jimmy, Nicole, and Judith, thank you all so much. Adam and Lisa, thank you. And we'll be letting you know about future programs to come.
thank you so much for doing
Thanks,
this.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for
Nice
having
meeting
us.
you all.